From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. Did you know that the majority of progress the U.S. has made in reducing emissions over the past decade has come from the oil and gas industry, with more electrical power generation now coming from natural gas versus coal? The air we breathe today is cleaner than it has been since the 90s, according to a report from the EPA. Clean-burning natural gas is also a reliable source of power for more than just our electrical grids. It is also used to power data centers, hospitals, schools, and so much more. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, is a term you may have heard more of in recent years. It shows up in headlines, on social media, even in the way we talk about our own habits and focus. But what exactly is ADHD? What really are the signs of ADHD? And with so many more people talking about it, is ADHD on the rise, or are we just more aware? To help us answer these questions, we're joined by Dr. Frederick Allen Walker. He's a Louisville-based psychiatrist and the founder of Louisville ADHD. Dr. Walker completed his medical degree at the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine and a 4-year psychiatry residency at the University of Louisville. He's been focused on this work for more than 20 years, bringing not just clinical insight, but personal experience to the conversation. Dr. Walker, thanks for being here on Track.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So starting from the beginning, what exactly is ADHD?
Well, it depends on who you ask. There's different theories that are out there. Currently, scientists don't know what causes ADHD. So I think it's difficult to define exactly what it is unless you know what the cause is. But in short, it's a lot of different symptoms. Poor time management, forgetfulness, procrastination, hypersensitivity to various senses, smell, taste, touch, hearing, easily distracted. The list is pretty long. There are essentially 6 core symptoms of, if you want to look at the DSM and the way that they boil it down, it's 6 core symptoms of hyperactivity and 6 core symptoms of inattention. But I found that, that the DSM is constantly being revised. So my focus is on, looking at the symptoms, identifying the symptoms, how long they've been there, and probably most importantly is how impairing are the symptoms? How much suffering is it causing? Disruption is it causing in a person's life? And because to me, we take an oath, whether it's the osteopathic, the Hippocratic oath, do no harm and take away suffering. So I feel my job is if the impairment's great enough and the criteria is met, then we need some sort of a treatment intervention to try to help those people cope with the day-to-day things that they struggle with.
I think it's interesting you said, we don't know the cause or how it develops, so how can we define it? I think that's really interesting to think about, because I've heard things like that there's different types as well, and there's different ways to look at this, but the only thing I've read about is linking like that maybe there's something in the brain, maybe there's genetics, but we don't really know how it develops. Is there anything we do know?
Well, my current theory on it right now, and one of the reasons I went into practice is because of my own ADHD and seeing my family and the suffering of my family. And so currently, my theory, which is shared by other people out there, probably more PhD than MDs, this is not a neurodevelopmental disorder. This is an evolutionary issue. What people don't realize is it takes humans, when we go through what are called paradigm shifts, that would be the Industrial Revolution, Agricultural Revolution, It takes 25,000 years for genetic adaptation to occur in humans. We went through the agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago. More importantly, in the last 120 years, we've gone through the Industrial Revolution, science and technology, computers, and now AI. Now, more specifically, when you go back, just say even 150 years. And by the way, I have a presentation that I give people when they come into the office that gives them so they can visualize the amount of time and what that looks like, sort of a proportionate timeline. And obviously on radio, we don't have the opportunity to do that, and we don't have enough time to delve into all the details of that. But suffice to say, we've been here walking the earth for 300,000 years, human beings. That's 288,000 years we've been hunter-gatherers. 12,000 years ago, we started to farm, so we became more sedentary. 150 years ago, just 150 years ago, you ate what you grew or killed. Mm-hmm. If you wanted fresh water, you had to go find it, right? We didn't have Walmart, McDonald's, electricity. Somebody bad shows up at your farm or your ranch. What are you going to do? There is no 911. In other words, the world was more threatening. Every day was more threatening, and every day you were focused on the basic needs of life: food, water, shelter. What that does to the human brain, if you live in a more threatening environment, you're going to have, at some level, an increase in your fight-flight response. Now, with the fight-flight response, you have a lot of different physiological changes. Those are hardwired in your DNA. They're involuntary. They're going to happen whether you want them to or not, right? One of them is the dopamine in your brain increases. Dopamine has been found to be the chemical that allows us to stop doing what we're doing and pay attention to potential threats. Mm. And this is why in this classroom, when you see, especially probably the younger boys, because boys are hardwired to be hunters, there's exceptions to that, right? Mm. But in general, and you'll see in the classroom, boys, if they hear a noise behind them in a quiet classroom, they're going to turn around and look. And they literally turn around and look before they even know that they're consciously aware of it. And that's a survival mechanism. It's why people can jump out of the way of cars. So that system is so fast. It's faster than your visual system. In other words, you react before you even see the car coming. Mm-hmm. And that's why people can jump out of the way. So point being made is higher dopamine levels increase your ability to pay attention to the task at hand. Right? So if you have a threat, well, we were talking earlier, we'll use the example that we were talking about. You and I were both commercial fishermen in Alaska in our earlier days. Well, it's the most dangerous job in the world. That increases your dopamine. You and I are both here. We also both know people that died while they were doing it. Yeah. Right? Because it is dangerous. Mm-hmm. You and I are both here, in my opinion, because we're wired for environments like that. Not everyone is. Mm-hmm. Okay? And because in a dangerous environment, your dopamine levels increase. Well, in the modern world, we don't live, it's not threatening.
Right.
Not in the way it used to be. We're sitting in front of computer screens, and when you ask some folks, not all folks, to sit down and do their taxes, that's boring. It's tedious. It's mundane. And they procrastinate. Now, it's interesting, the topic of procrastination. The reason people procrastinate, and I'm not sure that I think this might be true for everyone. Because if you really look at the theory that I'm proposing, evolutionary, it means everybody has the hardwiring to be a hunter-gatherer. That's why looking at the impairment, I think, is more important. So the reason people procrastinate, and if I ask my patients over 20 years, they'll all tell you the same thing. I would wait till the last minute to study for an exam. And the night before the exam, I could study and I could focus. But if I tried to sit down ahead of time, I didn't get anything done. And the reason for that is physiologic. It doesn't, and here's the good news. It has nothing to do with your character, your integrity, or your work ethic. There is nothing wrong with you. You're waiting for your fear of failure to increase the dopamine levels, which comes as the deadline approaches. And that's why the night before you can focus, because you literally have higher levels of dopamine. Now, the good news is we can prescribe medicine to increase dopamine to give people the ability to sit down and get their work done anytime they want, which was a life changer for me because it allowed me to go to medical school.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that because you've shared that you have personal experience with ADHD yourself, and this evolutionary theory makes a lot of sense to me because I've been thinking about maybe it's the things around us, like the TikTok, 15 seconds, notifications, scrolling, fast-paced media that maybe influence or mimic some of the symptoms of ADHD. Maybe environmental has something to do with it. Is that part of the evolutionary theory as well?
Gosh, I don't know that I could put into words. I don't have it all figured out right. But just to comment on that, because that's a great question. These TikTok, Facebook, InstaChat. I always make fun of myself with my kids. Instabook, Snapgram. Anyway, those are actually designed to tap into your dopamine centers. In other words, the algorithms, when I was walking in, I was talking about fishing poles. I was making fun of myself because you sit down at your computer to do work, and all of a sudden, on your sidebar, there's fishing poles. Why is that? Well, the other day, I was looking at fishing poles. And now all of a sudden, they're trying to take my attention away from my work, right? And so that's a real challenge, I think, for all of us. And if your hardwiring is maybe, once again, theoretical, but if your hardwiring is still more slanted towards being a hunter-gatherer, I suspect that it's harder for us to ignore the fishing poles, right? It's also harder to avoid looking at the text message, because what if it's important? What if you have kids and it's from your daughter? Well, rest assured, I'm going to look at those. Yeah. Right? Because I need to make sure my kids are okay, right? It's tapping into those core fears we have as humans. So, the algorithms, though, for TikTok, Facebook, even emails, and I have to be very disciplined. When I sit down to write my medical notes, I have certain rules in my head, and, it's like, turn off the notifications and just, you ignore emails, text message, you ignore all that, get your medical notes done, then you switch gears. In other words, don't multitask. It just takes longer to get your work done when you're looking at emails and you're just shifting all over the place.
So I want to ask, how has living with ADHD shaped the way you practice medicine and connect with your patients?
That's a great question, because I always remember one of my attending physicians saying, you don't have to have schizophrenia to treat someone with schizophrenia, right? Or bipolar disorder or depression. I think that statement is a little bit different with ADHD. I think it's very hard to. This is where this conversation gets a little bit complicated, because there are people that probably have some symptoms of ADHD, aren't as hardwired to be a hunter-gatherer, but in other words, their struggles might not have been as robust as others. But when people come into my office and I'm treating them, my struggles were pretty significant. I really struggled in school, and the things I would hear growing up were, we're interest-based learners. So if I'm interested in a topic and I could do really well, and when I would do really well, my teachers would say, congratulations, see how well you do when you try? Okay, well, when you hear that, and I know they were trying to motivate me, but when you hear, hey, you need to straighten up your locker, see how well you do when you try, and these type of comments through your life, well, it hits your self-esteem, right? And so to be able to talk about my own personal experiences really opens the door, because if you didn't have those experiences, I think it's harder to relate or connect with the patients. In other words, I think having ADHD gives me a significant advantage in being able to connect with my patients because I can tell them things about what they're, like the procrastination thing I just mentioned. They all do that, or they have done that. And when you tell them what they're doing, and yeah, we're supposed to ask open-ended questions, but when you've been doing something for 20 years, sometimes they don't have to all be open-ended. You already know, that they're procrastinating. And when you tell them why, the light bulb goes off and they're like, okay, this guy gets it. And that's a neat feeling for all of us, right? And so there's that connection. And because to me, it's really all about you're trying to develop trust.
Right.
I need to trust them. They need to trust me. And that makes that therapeutic relationship all the more meaningful. Honestly, it's the building block. It is the fundamental building block for a good therapy, a trusting relationship.
Well, we'll be back with more after the break. You're on track with Louisville Public Media. Hi, it's Aisha Jaffer, host of On Track. As a fan of the show, you may be wondering how you can help support this hyper-local podcast that focuses on topics and conversations that affect us and our community. One of the best ways is by donating at lpm.org or by becoming a sponsor of On Track. We work hard to create diverse and engaging conversations featuring guests from Louisville and Southern Indiana. To learn how your business can sponsor On Track, contact Tracy Karam at tkaram@lpm.org. It's a meaningful way to support both the show and the community while aligning your brand with important local conversations. Thank you.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. Did you know that the majority of progress the U.S. has made in reducing emissions over the past decade has come from the oil and gas industry? With more electrical power generation now coming from natural gas versus coal, the air we breathe today is cleaner than it has been since the 90s, according to a report from the EPA. Clean-burning natural gas is also a reliable source of power for more than just our electrical grids. It is also used to power data centers, hospitals, schools, and so much more. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.
Welcome back to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. Today we're exploring what it really means to understand ADHD with Dr. Frederick Allen Walker, a psychiatrist and the founder of Louisville ADHD. Now, you sort of said this in your definition of ADHD, but if someone suspects they might have it or like are submitting signs for it, what are those signs to look for?
Forgetfulness, disorganization, procrastination, difficulty maintaining healthy relationships, sensitivity to, Hippocrates, we've been talking about this all the way back to 493 BC.
Wow.
Hippocrates described patients, and this is interesting because he didn't pathologize the patients. He just said they had quickened responses to sensory experience. Well, our senses are, sight, smell, taste, touch, so forth, so on. Well, on my intake form, you check the boxes that say, do you have a sensitivity to smell, taste, touch, or textures? And one of my good friends we were out at my farm one day and we had some meat smoke, and we both have ADHD. And he has really heightened sensitivities to sensory experiences. We are 2 miles from my house, and he says, do you smell the meat smoking?
Oh, wow.
And I didn't, and I have good sense of smell, and I didn't, and I said, that's your ADD. I said, that's amazing. Yeah, it is. It is in a lot of ways, right? You have to have heightened sensitivities to be a good hunter.
Yeah.
And which is something I've gotten into in just like the last 5 years, and I love it. I used to be a big golfer, and now I'm a big hunter and fisherman and things of that nature.
I love that. So, okay, those are some of the signs. What a fascinating one. I really do look at it as a superpower. Well, so when we get to the point and you suspect it, what does the diagnostic process actually involve, and how accessible is it in terms of cost and even timeliness?
Gosh, you probably have to ask my patients that have shopped around. My understanding right now is, well, first and foremost, in our current where we are right today with like schools and other institutions, they've given people the impression that there's testing for ADHD, specific tests. They'll say, you need to get tested for ADHD.
Right.
Okay. There is not a specific test for ADHD, right? If you have a broken bone, you go get an x-ray to see if it's broken. We don't have that for ADHD. And so psychologists approach it differently than psychiatrists. I'm a psychiatrist, right? And so our approach is different. They have a series of questions, and whereas in my office, we sit down and I have a 15-page clinical evaluation that we send before you even step into the doors. So you can fill that out, which saves time and money. And it's probably a bit unorthodox, but hunter-gatherers don't like to waste time and money. And so, I send that out, and then they come in and we sit down and we start talking and we go through the form together and we clarify, there's an 83-point checklist that goes through, I can't remember, reel it off to you right now, but it's all about the symptoms of not only ADHD, but depression, anxiety, because a lot of times those are comorbid with ADHD.
Well, and I'm actually curious about just awareness, because this is coming up in conversation more and more. Do you think more people are being diagnosed with it, or just more awareness of this?
Oh, I think there's definitely more awareness. There's also more people being diagnosed, and and it's well beyond, the prevalence rate is well beyond any other mental health issue out there. Once again, I think that's because it's an evolutionary issue.
Right.
Right? It just, once again, depends on how does it emerge in each individual's maybe DNA. Okay? So, and if the impairments are great enough and people are reading on social media, now to touch on that real quick, a lot of the stuff on social media is not accurate.
Right.
So you got to be careful about some of those things. It is the diagnosis, the treatment, the discussions are always evolving about ADHD. And so are the research papers. They used to say that we had differing brain volumes. Well, that's been debunked. Okay.
And I've seen those online tests as well, which I know I've taken just to see, but I think I don't know what level of accuracy is with those as well.
I think I've not taken a lot of them. I've looked at them. They're pretty good because they do touch on the primary symptoms. But it's important to go see a medical professional because there are things that can mimic ADHD. You can have thyroid issues. You can have a history of abuse, trauma.
Yeah.
Right. And that can mimic, or you can have an overlap. And so, just to touch on, the women, because I think this is fascinating. The women that come in to see me are typically older. Their life has gotten to a point, because as you get older, your responsibilities increase, right? And you get busier. And they end up showing up when they're older, because school's just an easier period of time for the women. Women are better at school. I know this because I've asked teachers. They come in and they've been diagnosed because they were good in school with depression and anxiety. They've been on any number of SSRIs, and they say, Doc, I just don't feel like any of those medicines got to the root cause. And as a matter of fact, one of the reasons I opened my practice is I started seeing patients during my residency at U of L, and a lot of them had been diagnosed with treatment-resistant depression. And I would start talking to them, and I'd say, has anyone ever told you you might have ADD? They'd say no, and I'd say, it sounds like you have ADD. And so I'd go more in depth with a discussion about ADD symptoms. And of course, at the time I was a doctor, I had oversight of an attending, and I started putting some of these people on ADD stimulant medication. And they'd come back in, they'd say, Doc, I've never felt better.
So it shows up different in genders, right?
It does show up differently. It does. And the women typically, I don't see a lot of younger girls. I just don't think, as a general rule, they're not as hyperactive as the boys. It's interesting, though, if you get to talking to them, they will describe an internal sense of restlessness, and it'll manifest in like playing with the buttons on their shirts or twirling their hair. They'll also talk about while they were in school, they felt like they had to work harder than everyone else to make their grades, but because they made straight A's, they flew into the radar. And because they're not as hyperactive, they fly under the radar, right? If the boys are more disruptive, and there's also, I think, a double standard in our culture, right? You can be a bad boy, you can't be a bad girl.
I also want to touch on something you said. You said ADD and ADHD. Are they interchangeable?
You know, I think it's the same thing.
Okay.
Okay. I go more to, I don't think it's consequential because my treatment plan for people is the same. And whether you have restlessness or not, if you're more restless, we just talk about where do you channel that energy? That's just energy is what it is.
Right.
And you want to channel that energy into positive, productive, constructive, dopamine-producing activities. Now, you can't do that all day long because in the modern world, we have to do boring, tedious work from time to time. It's just necessary. But we talk about getting that done so that you can then go fishing or do carpentry or horseback riding, which is, by the way, one of the big activities of the women that I see. I meant to talk about that earlier when we were talking, and my ADD got the better of me probably. But you think about horseback riding, that's kind of dangerous, right?
Yeah.
It's a 1,200-pound animal.
Yeah.
I have tons of women that love horseback riding. I think they're also really good at getting in touch with, communicating with their horses.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
so I would say, then what would you say would be forms of treatment, and what are some resources for people who might be listening and being like, I might be interested to know more about ADHD and ADD?
Oh, well, LouisvilleADHD.com. You got to be careful. You know, there's lots of different resources out there, and it's confusing. And it's no one's fault. That's first. Nobody's doing that on purpose. This is just where we are in medicine.
Right.
You know, and I'm not saying I've got it figured out. I do believe in my theory, obviously, that it's evolutionary in nature because it helps me to understand it. It helps my patients to understand it. It helps them to understand the treatment plan. So to answer your great question, you know, about treatment, if you lived in the world just 150 years ago, your dopamine levels are going to be higher. Well, let's raise your dopamine levels so you can function in today's world the way you would 150 years ago. Okay? And then we also add on other ancillary organizational, once you're on the medicine, we add on other ancillary techniques, which is all part of our medication, our clinical methodology. And that yields fantastic results.
That's incredible. And then real quick, any books, podcasts, things like that you would recommend?
I always tell people to go to Dr. Hallowell. Dr. Hallowell, a colleague that I respect very much, helped get my career started. He actually came down to Louisville. I think he's written the best books. He's a Harvard-trained psychiatrist with ADHD. He sees it very, very much from the same angle as I do, and I think he's written the best books.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Walker, for joining us
You're
on
welcome.
Track, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor.
Dr. Frederick Allen Walker is a Louisville-based psychiatrist and the founder of Louisville ADHD. He earned his medical degree from the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine and completed his psychiatry residency at the University of Louisville. With over 20 years of experience, he helps patients better understand and manage ADHD. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. Our music is by Kojin Toshiro. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at LouisvilleOnTrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about, something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending us a text or giving us a call at 502-814-TALK or send us an email at ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffert, and remember, being kind is free. That's the start of community. Until next time, you're on track with Louisville Public Media.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. Did you know that the majority of progress the U.S. has made in reducing emissions over the past decade has come from the oil and gas industry, with more electrical power generation now coming from natural gas versus coal? The air we breathe today is cleaner than it has been since the 90s, according to a report from the EPA. Clean-burning natural gas is also a reliable source of power for more than just our electrical grids. It is also used to power data centers, hospitals, schools, and so much more. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.